Tony signed his mortgage papers in October 2023, feeling pretty good about the whole thing. He'd negotiated hard on the price. His credit was solid. He thought he'd done everything right. What Tony didn't know was that 3 months before he walked into that closing, a $145 trillion market had already made a decision that would cost him an extra $96,000 over the next 30 years. No one called him. No one sent a letter explaining it. The number just showed up in his payment, and Tony accepted it the way most people accept things they don't understand, as just the way it works. Here's the thing. It doesn't just work that way. There's a specific reason. A mechanism. A number you can look up in 5 seconds that tells you exactly where mortgage rates are going before your bank does. That market, the $145 trillion one, is 3 times larger than the entire US stock market. It predicted every single US recession since 1955. 10 for 10, no exception. And it quietly prices your mortgage, your retirement savings, your job security, and the interest you're earning, or not earning, on cash sitting in your bank account right now. Most Americans have never looked at it once. The people who understand it aren't geniuses. They just learned something that was never taught in school and, for most of history, got passed down in households where money was already a regular topic at the table. Today you're getting that education. There's a version of America where a kid asks why the family's mortgage payment went up and gets a real answer. Their parent explains the market behind it, explains the rule that drives it, says this is the mechanism, learn it. Most of us didn't grow up in that house. That's not a failure of intelligence. That knowledge travels through specific channels, finance programs, investment firms, certain families, and it doesn't always make it out to everyone else. Tony didn't get that conversation. Most people watching this didn't either. This is it. A bond is a loan. Someone needs money, a government, a company, a city, and instead of going to a bank, they borrow from investors. You hand over a fixed amount called the principal. They promise 2 things back. A fixed interest payment every year called the coupon, and your principal on a specific date called the maturity. That's the whole instrument. Lend money now, get paid every year. Get it all back at the end. Bonds are not complicated. What makes them matter is the scale at which they operate. The US government carries $39.2 trillion in national debt right now. The interest on that debt, not the debt, just the annual interest payment, runs roughly $1.5 trillion a year. That's about $2.88 billion every single day. The US now spends more on interest payments than on national defense. Every dollar of that comes out of taxes. And the rate the government pays is set by the same market that set Tony's mortgage. There's one rule you need before anything else in this video makes sense. When interest rates rise, the price of existing bonds falls. When rates fall, the price of existing bonds rises, every time, no exceptions. Here's why. Say you buy a $1,000 bond paying 3%. That pays you $30 a year. A few months later, the government issues new bonds at 5%. Those pay $50 a year for the same $1,000. Now you want to sell yours. Nobody pays $1,000 for a bond yielding $30 when they can get one yielding $50. The only way to move it is to drop the price until that $30 works out to a competitive yield. At 5%, that price is about $600. You haven't lost your future payments. The bond still pays $30 a year and returns $1,000 at maturity. But on paper, your $1,000 investment is now worth $600. That's the rule. Every bad story I'm about to tell you. The 2022 retirement crash, Tony's mortgage, the broken 60-40 portfolio, is just this one rule operating at a larger scale. Of all the bonds in that $145 trillion market, one drives more of your daily financial life than any other. The 10-year US Treasury, currently yielding around 4.5%. When a bank sets your mortgage rate, it doesn't make up a number. It looks at the 10-year Treasury and asks, why would I lend money to a regular household for 30 years when I can lend to the US government for 10 years, risk-free, at 4.5%? The answer is, it wouldn't, not without getting paid more. So the bank takes the 10-year yield, adds roughly 2 percentage points to cover the risk that you might lose your job, get sick or default, and that's your rate. 10-year at 4.5% plus 2 points, you get 6.52%. The math is that direct. Now put Tony in it. Tony needs a $400, 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.52%. His monthly principal and interest is $2,534. The 10-year rises by half a point. Routine move. The bond market can do it in a single week. Tony's rate goes to 7.02%. New payment, $2,067. That's on 33s more every month for the next 360 months. Over the life of the loan, $47,898. Auto. Full pointer up. Also routine, rate hits 7.852%. That's 2 becomes $69 more a month over 30 years, $96,769 on a bond Tony has never bought, in a market he's never visited. Now run his numbers through actual history. January 2021, the 30-year fixed hit an all-time low of 2.65%. Tony's payment on a $400,000 loan, $1,620 a month. October 2023, same rate peaked at 7.79%, same loan. Same Tony. Payment $1,807 a month, same house, same loan amount, same buyer. The only thing that changed was the yield on the 10-year Treasury. The difference, $1,265 a month, $455,349 over 30 years. Tony didn't negotiate badly. He didn't make a poor decision. He just didn't know what to watch. The bond market sent him a $500,000 bill and never mailed the invoice. For decades, the advice was simple. As you approach retirement, move out of stocks and into bonds. Stocks grow your money, bonds protect it. The classic 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, was sold as the conservative, sensible default. The bond half was the seatbelt, the thing that kept the portfolio from going through the windshield when markets fell. In 2022, that seatbelt failed. The Federal Reserve raised rates faster than at any point in the previous 40 years. Fed funds went from near zero to over 4% in 9 months. Apply the rule, rates up, bond prices down. The Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index lost 13.0% that year. Worst calendar year since the index started in 1976. The S&P 500 fell 18.1%. A 60-40 portfolio, the supposed conservative default, lost about 16%. The seatbelt didn't catch anyone. It was attached to the same crash. It got worse further out the maturity curve. Intermediate-term treasuries, the kind sitting inside most target date retirement funds, lost 10.6%, biggest single-year drop since at least 1926. Long-dated zero-coupon treasuries lost 39.2%. A Santa Clara University analysis found 2022 was the worst year for long-duration U.S. bonds going back to 1754. Not 1954, 1754. The United States didn't exist. 13 colonies. And the safe sleeve of America's retirement portfolios was having its worst year in 268 years. The reason some bond funds got destroyed worse than others comes down to one number. It's called duration. It's printed on every bond fund's fact sheet. Most investors have never looked at it. Duration tells you approximately how much a fund loses for every 1 percentage point rise in rates. In dollars. A retiree with $500, 0 in a fund with duration 6. Typical for a broad bond index fund, loses $30,000 on a 1-point rate rise. A fund with duration 17, typical for long-dated treasuries. That same retiree loses $85,000. Same person, same $500,000, same rate move, $55,000 difference. Most people who own bond funds have no idea what their duration is. They were told bonds are safe and stop reading. Duration is the difference between a bruise and a broken leg. One more thing here that most people miss. If you own an individual bond and hold it to maturity, none of this price fluctuation touches you. You collect every coupon, get your principal back on the maturity date, done. The rule doesn't matter. A bond fund is different. It never matures. It's a basket that gets repriced every single day. When rates rise, the losses show up on your statement, and they stay there. The 2022 losses didn't disappear when the year ended. Government bonds are considered the safest borrower on earth because the US can always print dollars to repay dollar-denominated debt. Companies can't. Companies go bankrupt. So corporate bonds carry higher yields than treasuries. That extra yield is compensation for real default risk. The gap between government bond yields and corporate bond yields is called the high yield spread. When it's narrow, markets are calm. When it widens, the bond market is flagging something. It expects defaults, missed payments, layoffs, and this spread moves before the economic data does. It's one of the cleanest early warning signals in public markets. When fear actually hits, a war, a banking crisis, a credit downgrade, investors sell stocks and corporate bonds and move into treasuries. Prices spike, yields drop, sometimes within hours. That's called the flight to quality. This is why stocks and bonds usually move in opposite directions. Stocks sell off, money flows into bonds, bond prices rise, the overall portfolio softens the blow. That relationship is what made 60-40 work for 50 years. 2022 broke it because the sell-off was caused by rising rates, and rising rates hit stocks and bonds at the same time. The hedge failed because the thing being hedged had become the thing causing the damage. Most retail investors found this out reading their year-end statement. Professional bond desks were watching the spread months earlier before any headline caught up. One more piece of this market, because it has a better prediction record than any economist you've seen on television. The yield curve. It's a simple chart. Plot the yields on US Treasuries from 3 months out to 30 years. Right now, the 3-month yield's 3.71%, the 2-year yield's 4.09%, the 10-year yield's around 4.5%, the 30-year sits around 5%, those points slope upward left to right. That's what's called a normal yield curve, and it's the shape the market takes in the large majority of environments. The logic is straightforward. Tying up your money for 30 years carries more risk than 3 months. You want more compensation for it. Economists call that extra return the term premium. Sometimes the curve inverts. The 2-year starts yielding more than the 10-year. When that happens, the bond market is making a specific call. It expects the Fed to cut rates within a year or two because it expects the economy to slow down enough that the Fed has no choice. According to research from the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, every single US recession going back to 1955 was preceded by an inverted yield curve. 10 for 10. 70 years. No other recession indicator has that track record. The yield curve doesn't make noise about it, but when it inverts, it's making one of the loudest statements in finance. Here's what makes this directly useful. The yield curve is publicly available, updated in real time, and takes 30 seconds to find. There's a reason institutional investors have standing alerts on it. Not to call the market perfectly, but because making a major financial decision without checking what the bond market is already pricing in is exactly the situation Tony was in. That information was always public. Nobody told him to look. Here's the most actionable part of this video. The FDIC reports the national average savings account pays 0.38%. That's what most major US banks are paying right now. 3-month Treasury bills yield 3.71%. The best high-yield savings accounts pay around 4.20%. All three are effectively as safe as each other. T-bills are backed by the US government. High-yield savings accounts are FDIC insured to $250. Zero per institution. Same safety, completely different result. Tony has $50,000 sitting in a 0.38%. That earns him $190 a year. Same $50,000 in 3-month T-bills at 3.7%, $1,055 a year. Over 5 years, the wrong account costs Tony $8,325. No additional risk, no trade-off, just the wrong institution. T-bill interest is also exempt from state income tax. In California, New York, or any high-tax state, the gap is even wider. If inflation is the specific concern, Series I savings bonds adjust with it. Current rate through October 2026 is 4.26%. There's a purchase limit, $10. 0 per person per year through Treasury Direct. But for money that just needs to keep pace with the cost of living, I-bonds are the most direct tool a regular saver has. 3 things you can do before this week is over. 1. If you hold bond funds in your retirement account, pull up the fact sheet and find the duration. Above 7, the fund moves meaningfully with rate changes. Above 15, it will act more like a volatile stock than the safe asset you were sold. That number takes 30 seconds to find. Not knowing it is not optional if you own the fund. 2. If you have idle cash in a standard savings account earning under 1%, compare it against a high-yield savings account or 3-month T-bills. Same money, same protection, dramatically different yield. The only thing standing between you and that gap is knowing it's there. 3. Bookmark the 10-year Treasury yield. It takes 5 seconds to look up. When it rises, mortgages, car loans, and corporate borrowing rise with it. When it drops sharply, the bond market is usually pricing in a slowdown before the data confirms it. It is the closest thing the economy has to a check engine light. You now know what it means. The bond market is not something wealthy people do in a separate world. It is the infrastructure underneath every dollar in your financial life. Your mortgage rate, your savings return, your retirement account, your employer's ability to borrow and make payroll. The people who understand it aren't smarter than you. They just had a conversation about it somewhere along the way, at a dinner table, in a finance class, at a job that made them learn it. You just had that conversation. If this connected something for you, subscribe. And leave a comment which part actually landed, the mortgage numbers, what happened in 2022, or the savings account gap. I read everyone.